We are going to build a beginner-friendly full-stack node-taking application using MongoDB, Express, React, and Node, aka the MERN Stack. I will assume you don't know anything about this tech stack, and as if it is your very first time building an application with it. We are going to start by building our API, then we will test it out to make sure everything is working as expected. Once we are done with it, we will get into the front end with React and complete the entire tutorial. So this is a node-taking application where we can create nodes with a title and description, and then we have update and delete actions. And this application will be completely responsive. And at the end of this video, we will deploy the app so that you can have the live link on your resume. This tutorial is completely beginner friendly, so you will learn how to build an API, what are the most common HTTP methods, the status codes, and the difference between SQL and NoSQL databases. And you will even learn how to implement rate limiting, which is a concept that you almost never see on a beginner friendly tutorial. But in this video, we will learn it in the easiest way possible. So that's the entire course. If you're ready, let's get into it. Just before we get started, if you'd like to build more advanced projects with this tech stack, we have a 100-hour course with more than 20 premium projects, such as building a Netflix clone, Spotify, Tinder, and even mobile applications. If you're interested, you can find the discount link in the description. Okay, so let's get started. Now, to be able to follow along with this video, you have to install Node.js. So go ahead and visit nodejs.org and download the long-term support. Once you have done this, you should be good to go. And then for the code editor, I'll be using VS Code. If you want to have the same workspace as I do, maybe you could install this or use whatever you would like to. Okay, once you have done this, just go ahead, create an empty folder on your desktop and just drag and drop it to VS Code, right? You can call this anything. This is the name that I came up with. Now we are going to need two different folders, one for the backend and then the other one for the front end. So in the backend folder, we will build the API, and under the front end, we will build the React application. So first we'll get started with our API. Once we have built everything related to backend, we will jump into the front end folder and build the React application. And before we write any code, I have prepared some diagrams that I'd like to go over. Now it's not really that much, I promise. It's not like a bunch of different slides, not at all. This is something that we would need to visualize some stuff and really enjoy the entire tutorial. You can find the link in the description. It's completely free. Okay, so let's get started with the MERN Stack. The question is, what the hell is the MERN Stack in the first place? Probably everyone knows this already, but M stands for MongoDB, E stands for Express, React, and Node. Now, MongoDB is our database that we'll get into in a second. Express will be the web framework. We'll get into it in a second as well. React will be the front-end library, and Node.js is the runtime. So the beauty of this tech stack is that both in the front end and in the back end, we are using JavaScript, right? You don't really need to learn any other programming languages other than JavaScript. All you need to do, just learn JavaScript and you're good to go. On the front end, we'll be using React, and on the back end, we'll be using Node.js. Okay, so let's try to break this down a little bit. This is what I have prepared right on the right hand side. Okay, so MongoDB is the database, and to put it simple, you already know this, but it is a place where we store the data, right? That's it. Let's keep it simple and move forward. So we'll be using MongoDB, and we'll get into the details in a couple of minutes. And then the Express will be our web framework, just like I said a couple of seconds ago. And a web framework is a ready-to-use toolbox for building web applications faster and more easily. So you don't really want to reinvent the wheel from scratch, right? Why do you want to use a web framework? So it'll save a lot of time. It'll make your code cleaner and more organized because they have built everything like from scratch, but someone else built it, and it's really stable, right? Something like Express, which has been used for years and years, so it's completely clean, stable, working perfectly. This is what we'll be using, and then it'll handle common tasks like routing, error handling, and everything that you can think of. And then we have the Node.js, which is going to be the JavaScript runtime. Now, what does that mean? Basically, it'll allow you to run JavaScript on the server. Normally, you can run JavaScript on the client, such as in your browser, but thanks to Node.js, we can run JavaScript on the server. And I hope that makes sense. And then finally, we have the React, which is going to be our front-end library, our favorite front-end library. And we'll get into the details, but I assume you know the basics of React, like super basics, like components, maybe use state and use effect. That should be it. Okay, so now that we know the basics of Node.js and Express, let's get started with it and build a really simple application. So I'll visit VS Code under the backend. First, I'll open up my terminal. The shortcut is Command J or Control J. So I will cd under the backend folder. So if you just type BA or BAC or only B and press tab, it's going to autocomplete. And then you can say initialize a Node.js application. So we can say npm init-y, which is going to give us a package JSON file where we can install different packages. So the first thing I'd like to do, clear my terminal and install Express. So I'll say npm install Express. Now, if you type this out, by default, it'll give you the Express version 5. But I'd like to use a specific version, which is going to be 4.18.2. So we'll be using some specific versions so that if you're watching this video in the future, it should not be obsolete. So you can still follow along with me the exact same way that I do, so nothing will break in the future. And the Express version 5 just came out. Currently, like everyone still uses Express version 4. So don't ever feel like this video is outdated. Not at all. Express version 4 is actually the version that currently everyone uses. Every single code base has it, okay? So it's not obsolete at all, not outdated, nothing. It's like up to date. Okay, let's go ahead and install it, which is going to give us a package log JSON as well as the Node modules. So these are the things that you don't really work with at all. Let's try to create a file. The convention is to either call them like index.js or let's say app.js, and we even have server.js. These are the conventions. I'll be going with the name server.js. Okay, let's create this file and let's import Express. Now I'd like to use this syntax where I can say import Express from Express. You cannot really use it by default. Let's try to run this file actually. I'll show you the warning and then we'll fix it. Let's say const create an Express app. Actually, this should be app. Let's say Express, call the method. And now we can listen on a port. I'll say app.listen. You can put any port. I'll be going with this value. So I would say just follow along with me. And then once we start listening, we can put a console log. Let's say server started on port, let's say 5001. Okay, now we would like to run this file. You can open up your terminal and you can just say npm run server.js. This would not work, obviously. So what you'd like to do, let's just run this. This is something that does not work. Maybe you have seen something like npm run dev in other tutorials. Now by default, this is also not going to work. And I'll show you how we can make that work. But if you want to run this file by default, you would say run this with Node.js. So we would say node and then server.js. Okay, so it says server started on this port. And we have a warning that I just mentioned. It's coming because we're using the import syntax. Now to be able to get rid of this, just visit the package JSON and here put the type to be module. By default, it is common.js where you need to use this syntax. So if you were to say express, require the express package. So this and this means the exact same thing, but they're just different syntaxes, right? So let's try to save and we shouldn't really have any warnings if you kill it with Control C and then run this again. Now we don't really have any errors. But if you want to use the import export syntax, you need to add the type to be equal to module. Now we don't really have that error if we try to run this. Okay, so that's the very first thing that I wanted to mention. Now, if you wanted to run this file with a script such as npm run dev, you would create this script. So this is the key. Let's put the key called dev. And then we would like to basically run this when we say npm run dev, right? So we will say delete everything here. We will say node server.js. When you say npm run dev, behind the scenes, it'll run this part. Now let's run this. It is working as expected. So I know that we are going really slowly, but I just want to make sure that we understand everything as we go. Now you can create more scripts if you really wanted to. So you can say something like hello. The key doesn't really matter. What matters is what you will run on the right hand side. So we don't really want to have something like hello. Instead, we'll have something called start. This is something that we'll get into in a second. But first, I'd like to just save this file and get into the server.js file. So here on the backend, under the server.js, we are going to build an API. I'll explain what that means. But first, let's just build a really simple route and then we'll understand what that does. So here I'd like to say something like app.get method. So listen for the, let's say, /API/ I don't know, let's say something like notes. Here, once we get the get request, we would like to run a function, which is going to take the request and response. So say request and response. So these are the things that Express will pass by default. You can take those values and maybe send a response. Let's say res.send. We can say something like, you got 5 notes. Now let's try to test this out. We need to kill this and run it again because we have changed something under the server.js. So I'll go ahead and run this once again. Let's try to send a request to localhost and our route and our port, which is 5001. Let's say 5001 /API/notes. Now we need to type this out because this is what we are listening to, right? With a get method. So I'll go ahead, send a request. This is the output. This is the response that we got. So believe it or not, but we have just built our very first API where we are listening for a get request and we are handling it properly. Now, obviously, this is not what we would like to do. This is just for testing purposes. But let's see what is an API in the first place. And just before we get into the APIs, let's see how a full stack app works in the first place. So you would have your client, which is the front end, and we have a server, right, which is our back end. And then we have a database where we store the data. So from the client, user would send a request. Here, let's say they want to delete a post, right? They click this button, they would send a request to the server. So we got the request. Now we would like to delete it from the database. The backend will delete it and send a response back like success. Here you go, this post has been deleted and the UI will be updated. So this is what we call the request and response lifecycle, right? You send a request and get a response back that would either successfully done or it would fail. So this is how a full stack application works simply. But now on the server, there are one more thing that we need to talk about, which is the API. So what's up with API? It stands for Application Programming Interface, which is absolutely doesn't make any sense. But in simple terms, it allows two different applications talk to each other, right? So you can think of it like a waiter. This is a pretty classic analogy that we'll go through, but I think this explains everything like perfectly, really clearly. Okay, so we have the waiter, which is the API. Let's say you visit a restaurant where you would like to send a request, right? You are the customer, you send a request. Let's say you want to get a chicken. Once it is ready, you will get it as a response back, right? So I just changed the color. You send a request and get a response back. And we have this man in the middle, which is the API. So that was the analogy. And in real world, you would send a request from your browser, right? You would send a request and get a response back, either success or error. But in either case, you would get a response back. So I really hope this makes sense. And this is actually what we have just built in simple terms. So we have the end user, which is here on the browser. It is us. we sent a request to this endpoint, to this URL, and we got a response back, right? Now in real world, and this is what we'll be doing in a couple of minutes, you would actually send a request, let's say here, before you send a response, you would interact with your database, right? You would send a request like, let's say, delete a post or delete a node, and maybe you would have another endpoint where you would like to create a node, right? These are the things that we'll be doing, but I hope for now everything makes sense. This is what we have built in simple terms. Now the question is, can't we just get rid of this API, the man in the middle? Can't we just interact with our database from the, let's say, from the front end? Why do we need it in the first place? Why do we need an API? So the answer is we definitely need an API no matter what. So you cannot really just access to the database. You cannot just interact with the database from the front end. Now, why this is the case? So imagine this, like 90% of your users will be good-hearted, right? They'll be good customers, but some of them will be really malicious. Let's even put an emoji. So they'll be really malicious and they'll like to kill your entire server, right? They'll like to delete everything that you have in the database, or maybe they would like to access everything other than just nodes. Let's say they would get access to every single password, so on and so forth. So you cannot really trust to the front end, to the client. Instead, you would have a waiter, which is someone that you can trust, and it's only going to do the things that you want to happen, right? So just to give you another example, let's say you get rid of the API, which is the waiter. Now your malicious user can just walk into the kitchen and steal something, right? It can, like, they can even break the entire kitchen. So that's why you always want to have the man in the middle, which is the API. So I hope that makes sense. Now there are different types of APIs. The one that we are interested in is the REST API, which is the most popular one. Like, this is what we're going to be building in this video. You can take a look at the other types of APIs, but 99% of the times you will be working with a REST API. Okay, now it uses HTTP methods, which are get, post, put, delete, and there is more like patch, but these are the ones that you'll see the most, right? 99% of the times, this is what you'll encounter. And the names are pretty self-explanatory. So when you send a GET request, probably you want to get some data, right? To give an example, you would like to get some posts on Instagram. When you want to do so, you would send a GET request. And in this example, we sent a GET request to fetch our nodes, right? And if you want to create one, you would send a POST request. If you want to update, you would send PUT request. And then to delete something, you would send a delete request. And here in the backend, we are listening for the GET request, right? This basically says if we get a request, a GET request under API and nodes, just go ahead, send the nodes, right? Let's delete this comment. Okay, so here you got a GET request and you would send the nodes, right? And if you want to create something, let's say you would listen for the POST request, and user would send you a POST request. This part could be anything. You can just say API/hello, anything that you wish, but most of the time it should be something that makes sense. Here, let's say they would like to create the node, and then like instead of this, we'll get into it. We'll build it with actual code, but these are just examples for now. And then you could create, let's try to duplicate this. So you can create the put method, right? And it's actually auto-completing. So we have patch, we have delete, so on and so forth. We'll get into every single one of them, but this is basically what we have. And then there are some status codes. So it starts from 100 all the way up to 500 that we'll get into. I have a bunch of different examples that we'll go over. So any status code that starts with 100 is informational. This is something that you are not really encountered that much, but just know that 100 status codes are informational. And then anything that starts with 200 is a success message, and 200 itself is okay, like everything worked as expected. right? Everything went successfully. And then 201, which means something created successfully. So let's say you created a node, you would get 201 from the backend, right? Let's try to actually do it. Here under the get request, just before we send the response, you can say res.status. We can just say 200. It is done successfully. If you had the post request, you could say 201. Let's say your node has been created successfully. Okay, so I hope that makes sense. 200, anything includes 200 means success. And these are the most popular ones that you should keep in mind. And then we have 300, which stands for redirection. Again, not something that you would encounter that much, but I just put it here so that you can have it in your notes. So let's read it out loud. The 300 status codes are for redirection, meaning the server is telling the client, hey, the thing you are looking for is somewhere else. Let's take a look at an example on the 301 status code, which means removed permanently. Okay, so let's take a look at the example. Let's say your site changes from http://example.com to https://example.com. So you just changed something, and then you would set up a 301 redirect so that the visitors and Google would know to go to the new one, right? To go to the new one. Again, this is not something that you'll encounter that much, but just keep this in mind. So yeah, you can have this in your notes. Alright, and then finally we have the error status codes, which are 400 and 500, right? The ones that include 400 or 500. Now let's see, I'd like to just immediately show you an example before we read it. So we have 404, the most popular error message, which means not found. Let's try to see it in action immediately. So I'll say API/hello, which is something that we don't really have. We're gonna get 404 error. Now if you say inspect and visit network, refresh this page, and just make sure you select the fetch XHR or maybe even all. Okay, just refresh, you got 404 status code, right? It means you don't really have this route. Okay, so once you have 404, it means there are some errors on the client. So think of it like you as the client, you as the user, you just messed something up, right? You sent a request to a wrong URL, or maybe you are unauthorized, but you try to create something. So to give an example, let's say you're on Instagram, without logging in, you cannot share something. If you try to do so, you're gonna get 401, which means unauthorized. Okay, so that means the client errors happen when the problem is on the user side, meaning your browser or your application made a bad request. These are the most popular ones that you should keep in mind. So 400 bad request, it says like this is invalid. 401 unauthorized, you must be logged in. 403 forbidden, you're not allowed to access the site. 404 not found, and 429 too many requests. So we'll see this one as well. This is something that I'd like to leave it later in the video. And then finally we have the 500, which means the server errors. And you would get these server errors when something goes wrong on the server side. So even though you made a valid request, just because server couldn't make that work, you'll get a 500 status code. So you can think of it like the server tried, but it failed. And the most popular status codes are right here, which are 500 and 503. So 500 is a general error that says internal server error, right? So something is broken on the server side. And 503, which means service is unavailable, where the server is temporarily down, it is overloaded, it is like there are some maintenance, anything, you name it, it is just down, right? You cannot access it. And to give you an example, this is the 500 and 503 error page for GitHub. So currently GitHub is up and running, right? You can get the response, but if it was temporarily down, you would get this output, which gives you 503 status code. Okay, so I hope everything makes sense. Now I know that we went really slow so far. I just wanted to explain everything that you would need to be able to follow along with this video. We'll get into even more details just in a couple of minutes. But for now, this is what we would need to get started with it. And I'll go ahead, clear this up. Let's say for now, we can have this get request only. It is working as expected. So for now, if these are the things that you have seen for the very first time, maybe you can watch this section once again. So from start up until now, and maybe you can go over these diagrams. I think these are really important details that you should know, that you should keep in mind. However, if it is confusing, that's completely fine. It is too much information at the beginning, but we are going to get into the tutorial. We're going to write a lot of code, so everything should make sense. I'll see you in the next section where we'll work on our code base. Alright, so this is where we left. Now there is something really annoying in our code. Let's try to fix it. And before we fix it, let's try to understand what that is. Now you got 5 nodes as the response. Let's try to see it in action. Let's try to fix this. I'll say visit nodes. We got this response. But now every single time I update this, let's say I'll say 10 nodes. If I save and try to refresh this page, I'll still get the old result. Which means every single time I have a change in my code, I need to kill my terminal and make sure you're under the backend. And I need to run this all over again, which is really annoying, right? Now, if you take a look at the result, it will be updated. But this is not something we would like to have. Instead, every single time, once we save, once we change something, this should restart. So for this, we are going to install a package. Let's kill the terminal, clear this up with Command K or clear. If you're on Windows, you can say CLS. It should clear the terminal. So I will say npm install, the package name is nodemon, and I'll say -d, which means install it as a dev dependency. So let's go ahead and run this. Now we will visit package.json. We got the nodemon, here we go, and we will say run the server.js with nodemon, not node. Let's say nodemon. Now if you save and try to say something like npm run dev, it'll do the exact same thing, but instead it'll run it with the nodemon. So it is going to listen for every single change. It is going to watch it. Let's say you just said it's going to be 20. Once you save, it'll be restarted so that you can get the latest output without killing your terminal. Okay, so I hope that makes sense. This is something that you should definitely do in development. Otherwise, it's not really going to be comfortable. Okay, so now that we understand the nodemon and how to use it, I'd like to add another script, which is going to be for production. So this dev basically means development, right? You would like to run this while you're developing the application. This is exactly what we are doing. Currently, we are changing our code really often, right? So that's why we run this app with the development script. But once we deploy the application, we would like to run with a command called start, where we don't really want to use nodemon. Instead, we'll say, go ahead, run the server.js file with node, so that you don't really listen for the changes. We don't really need it, right? Once we deploy the app, probably we will never change the code. Even if we change, the application will be deployed again. So I know that it might sound complicated, but I hope you get the point. We will see this in action once we get into the deployment, so it's not going to be really complicated. For now, just know that this is something that you would like to run in development, just like what we are doing, because currently we are developing the application, and then once we deploy, we'll be using the start command. Okay, so this is something that you should keep in mind as a beginner. Okay, so this is something that you should keep in mind. Let's kill the terminal and go into the server.js file. Let's try to define some of our routes, and then we'll get into the database in the next section. So I just said, let's define some of our routes. You might be asking, what does that mean? Basically, this is a route that we have. We are listening with a get method under this URL. Once we got the request, we will do something, calculate, and send it back to the client. So this entire thing, what we call a route. There's also what we call the endpoint, something really common that you'll hear. Let's read it out loud. An endpoint is a combination of a URL and HTTP method that lets the client, that lets the user interact with a specific resource. So this is our very first endpoint that we have built. Let's try to duplicate it. If you wanted to, you can type this out. Let's do it actually. Let's say user wants to create a node. They would send a post request to /API/nodes, and then we would get the request and response objects. And then we would, for now, let's say res.status of 201. And remember, this means something created successfully. And then we can send a message. You can either use the send, or like this would actually send a response under the HTML, but we would like to mostly send a JSON response. So I'll say JSON, and let's send a message like post created successfully. Okay, and then we can duplicate this. We'll add another route where they would like to update a node. So we'll say it's going to be 200. Let's say post updated successfully. So these are for testing purposes. Of course, we will interact with the database a bit later in the video. Okay, now one thing is really important right here. If you want to update something, you would like to know which post that is or which node that is, right? You cannot randomly just go into the database and update something. You would like to get the ID of that specific node. So user will send it. So let's say they will send a request to localhost 5001 /API/nodes. Let's say the node that they'd like to delete has this ID. So they will send 21, you will get that ID, and you will delete that one specifically. Now this value could be anything, right? You don't really know that. So that's why we say this will be dynamic. Okay, I hope that makes sense. Since we are updating something, we'll say put method. And let's create one more for the delete, for the deletion. If we want to delete something, once again, we would like to get the ID so that we know which node that we are trying to delete. I'll say node, let's update them. Node deleted successfully. Okay, so for now, that's gonna be it for our endpoints, for our routes. In the next section, we are going to integrate our database, which is going to be MongoDB. Okay, so